Hi, welcome to Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I'm Dr. Caroline Leaf, your host, and I am excited to be with you today to talk to you about boundaries. We're starting a new little way of doing this, and I'm going to be doing short little podcasts on questions that people ask me. And people have asked so much about boundaries, and you can find out so much about boundaries all over social media. There's amazing books out there. But sometimes it can be a little confusing because, like, what are they? They can almost seem, so that it's almost like we're talking about them too much. They can almost seem kind of negative. You know, I want to just kind of bring a little bit of balance and perspective. So I'm going to show you some little images and things and props to help you understand boundaries a little bit better and help you use them more effectively in a way that's helped me and so many people. So first of all, though, I just want to remind you about my conference that is running the 2nd through the 4th of December. It is my annual mental health retreat running in Dallas, Texas. It is going to be so hands-on. You are going to really understand how to manage your mind that never stops for 3 seconds. So it's hands-on how to manage those intrusive thoughts, those things like people-pleasing, those inner critic, finding the root cause of problems. It's going to be practical, hands-on. How do we deal with depression? Got a great guest speaker, Michelle Williams from Destiny's Child, who's a great friend of mine. She's going to be talking about her experience with depression and how she also used the neurocycle to help her. And we're just going to really get down into the details of these things. So I hope you join me there. There's only a few limited tickets left. So go to the show notes and you'll find the link and go sign up for that. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there in person. We will be following all CDC guidelines so that everyone is protected in terms of the pandemic. So, and then one last thing is that this is not medical advice, this podcast. It's for educational purposes. So if you need medical advice, go to the appropriate medical professional. Back to today's podcast. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate boundaries with some props. So for those of you that are listening, I've got 3 different jars with me. One is tiny. It's kind of the size of a shot glass, just so that you can visualize it. And then I have a little black stone that is stuck inside the shot glass. So the stone basically takes up the whole of the shot glass. Then I have a slightly bigger glass, and then I have a mason jar. Okay, so now you may have seen me do this on Instagram where I use these props to explain about grief, but these props work so well to also explain boundaries. So when we think of boundaries, we think of boundary walls. Maybe in our garden, we live in a setup where we've got these big high boundary walls but between the houses, and if someone's going to jump over your wall, they're invading your space. So boundaries are quite fixed. They're keeping you in and keeping people out. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. But sometimes we can distort that perception, and we can kind of use that to anyone who's bugging us or any situation that's going on in our life at work, in relationships at home. Sometimes we just put up boundaries all the time in the wrong way, and that can actually damage relationships and damage yourself. So a healthier way, I believe, of looking at boundaries is actually to create space around whatever the issue is. So I'm going to hold up the little black rock, and this little black stone or little black rock represents an issue that you feel you need a boundary for. You feel like you are being cramped or you're being put in a corner, there's too much toxicity coming at you, whatever. So it could be a family relationship, it could be a friend relationship, it could be a work relationship, whatever. So it's whatever that is. If you can think of maybe something in your life right now, I'm thinking of something, okay? And basically what this little black rock represents is that issue. Now, notice that issue is there. It exists. There's something that's happened in that relationship where there is an interaction that has kind of become toxic, because if you are feeling like you need a boundary, you feel like you have had you feel like people are kind of invading your space or affecting you. So when we have any kind of interaction with other people, what happens is that interaction is an experience that we receive and process with our mind. Are thinking, feeling, and choosing. So we're thinking, feeling, and choosing about that experience very fast in these cycles of 400 billion actions per second. And all that's taken, and it shows up inside the brain, and it gets built into a physical structural neural pathway that looks like a tree inside of your brain. And if it's toxic, then it is going to be distorted for misfolded proteins, abnormal inflammation, incorrect chemical flow, vibrations that aren't flowing correctly. So there's a lot of physical stuff going on in that toxic communication inside of your brain, because your mind shows up inside of your brain. Your mind takes the experience and puts it inside of your brain. And there's a lot of this toxic experience showing up, and that then is going to affect your body, okay, and how you feel. Now, that toxic experience may have happened the first time, built into your brain, then it happens, then something else happens, and that thought comes back into the conscious mind, it's triggered, and more is added to it. It goes back down into the non-conscious mind, and over time, whatever we're paying attention to, whatever we're shining our flashlight on, is going to start growing and become bigger and bigger. And then it gets to the point where that toxic thought, which is that experience that keeps getting more added to it by every interaction with the person or persons in whatever context, is eventually going to, it's alive, it's dynamic, and it is made of data. There's information in that tree. So I'm going to hold up my toxic tree, my famous toxic tree that you've seen so many times. And this toxic tree is made up of data. So the source of the interactions over here, and that's the source data, and then that's the processing, and then this is the interpretation data. In other words, how you're looking at the situation and interpreting it. But because it's distorted, it's not going to be accurate. Now, in this data, there are facts, information, and there are emotions. And these facts and emotions, these facts and emotions are all memories. So memories, you get different types of memories, and the memories are in these thought trees, and they're facts and emotions. Now, because it's a toxic tree, those emotions are kind of strong, and they like glue, so they really impact. And when these are constantly activated, remember, when you build this into your brain, you've heard me say this before, not only is it in your brain, but it's also in every cell of your body. It doesn't look like a tree in the cells of your body. It's a change in your genetics, but your gene code, but it's in your brain, in your body, and in the waves of your mind, the gravitational field of your mind. So these emotions the emotional data are strong. They're like glue. And the stronger they get, as I said, the more impact they have on you. So when they keep getting triggered, this is going to produce a lot of toxic communication. And I mean, I put my hand up here. How many times have you been in these situations where you say that these emotions are bursting out, and because in response to something that the other person has said, and you trying to fix this, or you're trying to help, or whatever, and this just becomes this whole big messy thing. And you say things in the moment that you don't mean. Often people say what pops out when you're angry is the truth. No, not at all. Because when we have the strong emotional data that's all misinterpreted coming from toxicity, you're not going to really say what you believe. You're going to say what you've interpreted. It's going to be distorted. And that's nice to know. It's nice to know that is distorted, because it's not really the truth. And that's nice to know that that person that's saying that to you, that's not really the truth for them either. It's just this clash that's happening between you for whatever reason, and there's a root cause. The because of the whatever reason is down here. So sometimes we can't get to that root cause in you, and that person can't get to it in them, because there's so much keeping it alive between you. These emotions are like just flying, the emotional data, and this is producing all this communication that's toxic, and it's coming back at you, and what they're saying back to you is going inside and making more branches. So it's going inside, and it's invading your brain and your body, and on both sides. And that's when we just feel, hey, this is just too much. I can't do this. I can't think straight. This is just affecting everything. It's carrying over into other areas. And you may absolutely love and adore that person, but you're in this toxic period or whatever. Or you may not like that person at all, but that's because maybe it's just been toxic from the beginning. Whatever the reason, if this is a continual process, boundaries are definitely necessary. You need to get the space created in order for you to be able to get perspective. And once you've got perspective, you can then start detoxing and finding the roots. Now, you can't fix that person and force that person to change, but you're responsible for you. You have the ability to respond in the way that you want to. So here's the analogy. So now, for those of you that are listening, I've got the rock again, and I'm putting it in the first glass, and it's taking up almost the entire space of this first little container. That's the size of a shot glass. So as you're in the toxicity, it's all consuming. It takes up all the space. You can't see. It's tight, it's stuck. It's all consuming. There's no space. There's no perspective. You're not going to get to a solution like that. You're just going to keep hurting each other and taking it deep inside of you. And it's just going to lead to more and more toxic reactions. So what you need to do is create space. So boundaries are actually space creation. So now I'm going to take this rock and I'm going to make a decision to say to that person, okay, let's for a time, let's agree to disagree. Let's agree that we care for each other, that our baseline love is in place, or whatever you need to say. If it's a loved one and you're just in a bad place with them in that particular time, or if it's someone at work. So let's just agree to disagree and let's just create some space between us while we just both go and process how we're going to manage this. Now, you can't force that person to do it, but you can do it. Hopefully they will, but you're not going to worry about them because you can't have empathy for them if you haven't fixed yourself. And when you fix yourself, you are going to turn this toxic tree into a beautiful, healthy tree. And when you turn it into a beautiful, healthy tree, I'm holding up a beautiful green tree now instead of the toxic, wiry-looking tree. This is going to generate a sense of peace from you that every time that person comes at you with their toxicity, this blocks it. This toxic tree absorbs their toxicity. This blocks and deflects their toxicity so you stop getting it inside of you and creating brain damage. This creates brain damage. Okay, so how do we do that? We need to make that initial statement of I need the space to process. I'm not prepared to discuss this anymore. Whatever that looks like, you need to be very firm about how you are or aren't going to create that space. So then you create that space, and over time, maybe it's a few days, maybe it's a few weeks, maybe it's a few months, maybe it's a few hours. I'm now putting that same size stone, which is the issue, this toxic communication, but I'm putting it into a bigger container. And now we see that there's more space. There's a lot more space than in this tiny little shot glass which the stone consumed completely. So I'm not consumed with it anymore, which when I'm consumed with it, it's affecting everything. It's affecting other relationships. It's affecting work. It's affecting my sense of peace. It's affecting everything. But as I've created that boundary, I've created space. So my words, my decision, I've gathered awareness and I've reflected on this and I've made this decision and I've written this down. So I'm using the neurocycle to decide how do I go from this all-consuming no space to starting to create a boundary which is giving me the space to reconceptualize this situation. When I've got more space, I can start saying things to myself like, okay, that's not who I am. I'm showing up triggered like that because of. I need to do work to find the because of. I need my 63-day cycle, which is that 9-week cycle, to start finding your because of. So does that person or person. So do they need to do the same thing, but you can't force them. So hopefully they're doing it, as I said, but if they're not, you doing it. And you creating that space. And now I'm starting to see a lot more perspective. I'm starting to see, okay, well, let me see the good of that person, or let me understand that that person is saying those things not because they don't like me or whatever, but because they are hurting. And there's things maybe that I've done or said that have been misinterpreted or that really have hurt them, and I must take ownership for those. In other words, you start seeing and getting more perspective. You're creating space. So the boundary gives you the space to gather, reflect, do your writing steps, recheck, which is reconceptualize and work out a little action. And you do this daily over time. And as time progresses, eventually we get into, and I would say that this is kind of like the first sort of couple of weeks where you're going from this to this takes, let's say, around about 21 days. So from the little container to the middle-sized container, let's say it takes around about 21 days. And then from 21 to 22 to 63, which is another 42 days, I'm now going to put the same issue, the same stone inside my mason jar. Look how much more space I have got. How time hasn't reduced the issue because the issue's there, but it's given me the space to see the issue. That issue exists because until that person comes back to you and you actually resolve it, this issue won't go away. Once you've both done this work of detoxing the toxic tree, then you've actually resolved the issue. But while the issue is being resolved, there's the issue. You are working on yourself to get detoxed and get this healthy, stronger view to protect yourself. And so even if the issue still exists with this kind of space and this kind of of thought tree in your brain, you are now able to deflect. Now I am in a position when I connect with that person that when they do or say, or whatever it is, cut you off, ghost you, speak in a nasty way, say ugly things, attack you, you coming from this position, which is a position of strength. It's a position of, okay, I understand that's not who they are. They like that because of. I'm in a position of strength. So you're going to generate photons that are positive, that have a frequency wave that is a love frequency wave, that is a lot bigger. From the research, it looks like the research is indicating that your love waves are at about 520 hertz, whereas a fear wave, which would come from the toxicity, is at about 4 hertz. So when you consumed, when that toxic that stone is in the little cup, in the little shot glass, and you consumed that fear toxicity, even if it's a low hertz ratio, it's a very distorted hertz ratio, but it's all consuming because it's all you're thinking about. Whatever you think about the most grows. But if I create space with a boundary, I have now and reconceptualized and done the work of why I'm reacting and why I'm being triggered and why I'm doing those things. I've now created this new healthy thought that's generating all this healthy energy and photons, and I've got this space. So I've got perspective. Now I can look at that other person in a different way. I can get perspective. I won't take into my spirit, as we often say, or inside of me. I won't build that toxic tree again. As soon as that person says something, I'm going to see that it's coming from a source. It's a because of. There's a because of why they're doing that. And if I stay calm and peaceful and kind and loving, that eventually will drown out the toxicity in that person. It's neutralizing it. You stay safe. That person's going to be bombarded with love waves, and it's kind of going to force them to look at themselves differently. So there's another way of looking at boundaries. I hope that has helped you. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.